Hello everyone and welcome back to the HS Visio stage brought to you by Helsingin Sanomat, the biggest newspaper in Finland. Just before we get going, I can't hear the microphone that I'm speaking into, so I'm wondering whether someone might want to come and adjust that so that our audience can hear what I'm saying as well. So I'm just speaking primarily to the people working hard behind the scenes to make all of this work. And here we go, we have a microphone working. So I'll just say once again, hello and welcome back to the HS Visio stage brought to you by Helsingin Sanomat, the biggest newspaper in Finland. We are broadcasting to you live from Helsinki. Hello to all of you on the live stream. I really hope you've been enjoying your day as much as we have been, those of us that are present at Nordic Business Forum 2022. For anyone who hasn't seen the broadcast from this area so far, I'm journalist and broadcaster Maddie Savage. We have got another 45 minutes of fantastic guests lined up for you. We're going to be talking about psychological safety in the workplace, and we are going to be hearing from none other than Petter Stordalen, who, as many of you will know, is one of the biggest tycoons in the travel and hotel industry here in this region. And once again, we are taking your questions as well. You can use the Nordic Business Forum app, or you can send them in on slido.com with the code nbforum 2022. First up, though, straight from the main stage, literally I saw her running, sprinting to get here in time. Erin Meyer, who's just done a fantastic talk all about navigating cultural differences in a multicultural environment. Fascinating for me. I'm a Brit who lives in Sweden, currently working here in Finland. So I'm navigating three different things myself. Professor of organizational behavior. But we're going to broaden things out a little bit more in this section and talk more broadly about high-performance culture and ripping up the rule book, because I know these are some of the other areas that your work has focused on. And kicking off, you wrote a book along with Netflix's CEO about some of the core things that Netflix has done differently in terms of its employee policies. And I've read a bit about it, but some of the audience won't. This is fascinating. So tell us what's different behind the scenes there.
Yeah, so after writing the culture map, I received an email. I woke up one morning and the email said, hello, Erin, I read your book and I was very interested in it. I lived in Africa near where you lived in Africa. I'm the CEO of Netflix. My name is Reed. So I got to know Reed a little bit, and I was very interested in doing research about organizational culture with this company because they have an extremely unusual corporate culture that Reed feels has really underpinned the innovation and success in that company. And basically, I'm going to just really quickly, it's got three kind of tenets. The first tenet is you just need to get really high performers and then give them huge amounts of freedom. So like all of the processes, all of the rules that most companies do get rid of. And then it's very strange with many other things they're doing along the way.
Okay, and so one of strategy, just to pick on that, is this so-called keeper test. So what makes them think someone is a top employee that should be held on to?
Yeah, so if you want to give your employees a lot of freedom, which then will lead to creative thinking and innovation, you've got to have really good employees. And at Netflix, they use two methods for getting there. The first they call the Rockstar Principle. And the Rockstar Principle is some research based on software industry research that shows that if you take 10 software engineers that all have the same level of training, that the top one will provide at least 10 to 25 times the value of the average one. So in other words, when you're hiring people, you have a choice for a creative kind of job, like software engineering or any creative job where people are using their brains. Either you can hire 10 people and pay them an adequate amount, or you could pull all of that money together and hire just one person and pay them an amazing amount, right, in order to attract them. So that's the first idea, is that you try to really just go out there and hire the best by offering them a lot of money, and then you give them a huge amount of freedom. And then you were talking about the kind of creepy side to this. Should we go on with that?
Yeah.
Okay, this part makes people a little bit nervous. So they have something at Netflix that they call the keeper test, and the idea is basically that every manager should add on at least once a year, think about each person on their team and ask themselves some questions. And basically the idea is I would say, okay, like if Sandra comes into my office and she says, boss, I'm leaving the team. How would you respond? How would you feel? Would you be devastated? Would you say, oh no, Sandra, don't leave me? Would you do everything that you could to fight to keep Sandra? If so, she's the right person for that job. Would you feel relieved? Would you feel excited thinking about who you could get in that job? If so, then clearly she's not the right person for that job and you need to find a way to move her out and get her replaced. So it's these two things together that lead to this extreme high performance, which then allows you to give your employees extreme amounts of freedom, which then leads to extreme innovation.
So, this whole thing is quite extreme. It is quite different. What kind of reaction has there been to the book and to this approach?
Yeah, well, I've been fascinated because I thought that entrepreneurs and people in creative companies would be interested in it, but I found that automotive companies, hospitals, mines, basically, any company that I can imagine has been interested in thinking about how for their creative areas they can implement these ideas. And I think the way to think about it is that you might need to ask yourself a question like, in this part of my company, is error elimination more important than innovation? Or is innovation more important? And if error prevention, error elimination is more important, in those areas you want to keep all of the methods and processes that are left over from the industrial era. But if your goal is to get innovation going, then you really want to get rid of all of those rules and processes and try to get that freedom going. And I found most companies have at least some areas that applies to.
Really interesting that it's also happening in the public sector, in manufacturing. But what about smaller companies? If you're setting up a business, it's obviously much more of a risk to take on any employee. And then if you're talking about taking in one that you hope is going to be that rock star versus 10, what can smaller businesses take from these principles?
Yeah, but I think normally if you have a company that only has like 30 people, you're a small company, you probably don't have a lot of rules and process in place. It's usually as the company starts to get larger, some people do stupid stuff. Some people take advantage of the freedom that's allotted to them. So you sit down and you create an employee handbook. And in the employee handbook, you start telling people what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do. You start creating travel policies and vacation policies, and all of those processes, of course, create more efficiency and they minimize cost, but they also stamp out innovation because really creative, mavericky thinkers, they usually don't want to work in places like that. They want to work places that they can run free. So I actually think it's when we're small that it's super applicable. It's as you start growing larger that you need to be thinking about, okay, how can we operate on the edge of chaos but not fall into chaos? And that's where you need that really high-performing ethos.
Okay, great summary. Lots of questions coming in, so I'm going to take some of the audience's thoughts here. A few about what you already talked about on the main stage. This one says, does it make a difference in terms of high and low context if people are communicating in their mother tongue versus a foreign language?
Yeah. So, well, I'll give you an example. I had this guy, the Spanish guy, my class, so Spanish is a higher context language, and he was living in the UK. And he said, Erin, now that I've lived in the UK for 10 years, I'm getting better at English, but I still can't speak in English in a way that I feel I'm mastering the language. I can't work in poetry in the way that I could in Spanish. And I thought that was such an interesting concept because how many British business people are seeking to do business in poetry, right? So I do believe in the English language. It's harder to get that poetry going. The language doesn't allow us to do it, but the value system in those countries also doesn't usually match that.
Interesting. So people can people learn to if they're speaking a foreign language, also have the cultural codes? That's sort of a double whammy, isn't it?
I would say that I've lived in France for 21 years, and there's still a lot of the deuxième degré, that what I meant and what I really meant, that I just totally miss. So yeah, it takes more than 21 years. I can confirm that.
For me, it's been 8 years in the Nordics, and actually I struggle to be polite,
Yeah.
but maybe that's okay because it's more direct.
Do your mapping. Yeah.
I'll do my mapping after this. Jovin says, could you talk a bit more about negotiating across cultures? What pitfalls do you experience?
Yeah, well, one of the dimensions that we didn't look at today, I just mentioned it quite right at the beginning, was that disagreeing scale, where we look at cultures that we really like to have an open disagreement. And you saw in that, for example, France, where I live, very strong on the confrontational side. Israel, Russia, but also we saw like Denmark really like to have a good spar, right? A good strong debate. And of course, if you're working with a more avoid confrontation culture, we showed Sweden as an example, but even further over the Asian countries, when you say, I disagree in a negotiation, that may really come off as very offensive. So in these cases, we always need to think, instead of saying, I disagree, think about how to put yourself on their side and then quietly suggest other methods without suggesting the disagreement openly.
Really interesting. Moving away from language to some of the sort of cultural differences in the way business is doing, you're based in France, and one of the reasons France has been in the headlines from a business context recently is this rule about not letting employees check their emails outside of work hours. And I wanted to know if people are really sticking to this, how effective it is, because it's something I know a lot of other people are trying to do.
Yeah, but that's such a great example in comparison to what we were talking about earlier about not having rules, right? And I do think if we go back to that topic, that's been so confusing in a lot of businesses. Sorry, I'll bring the two books together. That's been very confusing because just recently, I think that many companies have been understanding I need to get rid of processes and rules in order to get innovation going. But then after the pandemic, people were finding, well, if we don't tell people to come into the office, that they won't come, right? And we have this new focus on work-life balance. I have to tell people that they are not allowed to look at their emails. So I actually think that it's better to what we call lead with context, not control, which is model as a leader the kind of behaviors that you like instead of putting in place rules. And you're right, that is going on in France.
Well, what do you think about vacation? I mean, that's a very common thing here in the Nordics that you should take all of your vacation together in July rather than spread it out as you want. Would that be something that you personally think isn't necessarily an advantage then?
Well, I think here in Sweden, that's wonderful because here in
Finland.
Here in Finland, I think it's wonderful because when the whole culture is doing it, gosh, we all get to go on vacation and no one harasses you. But I can tell you, I spend my summer in the US, and unfortunately, we all go on vacation at different times. So you never have a moment where there's a real pause. And that's how culture really can have a big impact.
Yeah, so something you see in a positive light. And I quite like this one quickly from Miko, who said, how would you deliver this context communication keynote that you gave to a Japanese audience? Because you were talking about some of those very wide differences.
I'd like to actually answer that, which is that so sometimes people will say to me, when I work internationally, is it better for me to be myself, right? Is it better for me to be authentic? Or is it better for me to be flexible? Is it better for me to adapt my style to the culture that I'm working with? And the first, several dozen times I gave keynotes in Japan, I was trying to adapt myself. So not being like I was on stage a moment ago, not, waving my arms around and jumping around the stage. I tried to be quieter in my body language, to build silence in to my delivery. And I remember that my Japanese publisher, the woman at the Japanese publisher, came up to me after the presentation once, and she said to me, Erin, please do it like they do it on TV in the US.
So not toning it down too much.
And not at all. And she said, next time, can you go into the audience and start giving them the microphone like we've seen on TV? So I saw in that way it was better not to try to do it their way, but just keep to my own authentic self.
Well, we really enjoyed seeing your authentic self on stage, on the main stage, and here in the live studio. Please give it up for Emma Meyer. Thanks, Erin.
Thank you very much. Thanks, you guys.
All right. right, we're going to do a quick change here in the HS Visio studio and bring on our next guest in just a moment. We're going to continue talking a bit about organizational leadership and psychological safety with our next guest. She is Professor of Leadership and Management at Harvard Business School, Amy Edmondson. Welcome.
Thank you.
And I should say, Amy's joining us just before her talk on the main stage, which is coming up really shortly. So thanks very much for stopping by on the way here. So Amy, you identified the concept of psychological safety back in 1999. Could you just summarize what it is, what it means for people that haven't heard of it? Well, I think we're going to be hearing more about it later.
We will hear more about it in just a few minutes.
Yeah.
So, but I will say the simplest way to say it is it's a sense of permission for candor. And this has so many interesting connections with the work that Aaron was doing, right? But when you believe that you are expected to tell the truth as best you can, and there'll be nuances across cultures, of course, but it's a sense that that's what's appropriate around here, and it's pretty rare.
So how has work from home, hybrid working, the pandemic affected this? Has it made it harder or easier for people to feel a bit more comfortable?
On average, harder, but a great deal of variance.
Why has it become harder? We heard so much about people are going to understand more about your personal circumstances at the beginning.
You know, because we're not as able to read the air. I can't help building on that wonderful prior talk. So there's less nuance in our ability to sort of read the room, to understand those moments when, in fact, your voice is welcome, right? Which we can read more naturally in a face-to-face setting. And I think because initially when we all went home and started working virtually, we tried to just work the same way, but on Zoom or on Teams. And that doesn't work very well. You actually have to use the technology to have a different set of structures and tools to have the same high-quality conversations. You have to adjust the way you use the tools.
Does the type of organization play a role as well? I'm wondering, is it tougher in more hierarchical organizations, or is it just as tricky in flatter businesses?
I think what makes it is certainly hierarchy is a contributing factor to people's unwillingness to speak up. But the problem is, in organizations that think of themselves as flat, it can be even more challenging to speak up because they're worrying about what other people think of them, and they don't believe it's okay to worry about that. Whereas in a hierarchy, everybody knows it's okay to worry about that, right? If the boss is in the room, you're holding back, you're reading the tea leaves. And in a flatter organization, there's this belief, I'm supposed to just be myself, but everybody knows actually that's not so easy to do.
So if we're talking about leading from example, and there are a lot of leaders here in the audience, how can you, as a manager, as a team leader, embody these values of personal safety yourself and therefore encourage people in the team and the company to do the same?
You know, one of the leaders I studied, Eileen Fisher, says, be a don't knower, right? Which is so counter-normative to our model of leadership. Like people, many leaders are absolutely allergic to the idea that they could say, oh, that's interesting. I didn't know about that. Tell me more. But what she says is, when you are a leader, Ed Catmull says the same thing, it's absolutely essential for you to go first, right? To make it safe to not know. We live in a knowledge explosion, right? There is just no way you know everything.
No way.
Nobody does. And so the sooner and the more cheerfully you can acknowledge the things you don't know and convey how interested you are to learn from others, the sooner other people will be doing the same thing.
Yeah. Thank you for the questions coming in on Slido, by the way. Keep them coming, slido.com, and then it's nbforum 2022. Kaliameki podcast, they've been sending a few questions in. Amy, what is the most valuable thing we lose if we fear? So if we're too afraid, I guess, to have that feeling of safety.
Well, there's the personal and the material. And the personal that we lose is, it's when fear dominates, when fear rules, we are in a position where we are unable to truly express ourselves, to truly contribute. So we sort of lose that opportunity to have a sense of joy in the work we're doing, a sense of being a part of something larger than ourselves, a sense of really contributing to something that matters. And then materially, when people are afraid to speak up, there's two categories of really bad things that can happen, and one relate to human safety and dignity. You know, when someone could have prevented serious harm but didn't, and the other relate to business decisions and lost opportunities for innovation that didn't go the right way because people held back and didn't feel safe to speak up.
Yeah. Jovin picks up on this, and I'll just highlight their question so everyone else can see it. You mentioned reading the room and feeling the air, but obviously a lot of people are still working remotely, some still 100%. And Jovin says, how can CEOs build psychological safety in bullet point meetings online? So I guess they mean, you know, if it's just a sort of a classic, here's our agenda for the day, and giving an atmosphere where people can say, yeah, but I want to add this, or I want to do something different.
You know, I'm not quite sure what's meant by bullet points online, but I will say that the way you create psychological safety, first and foremost, call attention to uncertainty. Call attention to challenge, to novelty. You know, keep emphasizing the fact that we've never done this before. Like, we're all absolutely dependent on our ability to work together, right? So you're sort of, if you're setting a foundation for why your brain and your thoughts are necessary, it lowers the threshold. The second and most obvious thing is ask questions. You know, ask people, what are you thinking? What are you seeing? What are you hearing from customers? What are your ideas about that? What are we missing? Like, when you ask questions, people feel not only drawn to speak, they feel awkward about holding back. It reverses the calculus immediately.
Even in a space, though, where everyone feels comfortable to speak up, how do you deal with tensions around that? There's still going to be colleagues that don't do their job, that keep messing up. So how do you manage that alongside making sure everyone feels okay?
Well, so, I mean, this is a key misunderstanding, I think, about psychological safety. It's probably best to think of psychological safety as permission for candor, right? So if
all types of candor.
Right, if someone is persistently unable to do his job, he needs and deserves feedback. If that feedback doesn't have the impact that we need it to have for this person to be a contributor to the team, eventually we free up his future. Right? So psychological safety is not the same as job security.
No.
Right? It's not an anything goes, relaxed, comfortable environment. Right? The term is inadvertently misleading. Right? But what it means is we recognize that what's at stake here matters too much to just let fear and interpersonal fear keep us from contributing our thoughts.
So following up on that, Tina has written in and said, how can we connect radical candor and a growth mindset to psychological safety? Which I think, really kind of ties those threads together.
These are wonderful siblings. I think, so growth mindset is a set of beliefs that individuals hold that allow them to stretch because they believe they will be getting smarter and better from, you know, when things go wrong, that's okay. That's to be expected for novel tasks. But it's an individual mindset. Psychological safety describes a climate where, by the way, that mindset can flourish. So they're like siblings. You know, the individual brings the mindset, the team brings the climate, and nothing's stopping us. Radical candor. And radical candor is a manifestation of psychological safety. And Kim Scott and I have had many, many conversations about this. And radical candor does not mean brutal candor. It doesn't mean candor with no consideration at all about what you might think or how am I communicating actually. It's probably better to describe radical candor as compassionate candor, where I'm going to try my very best to be clear, but I'm going to be very curious about the impact I'm having. I'm going to want to know how am I doing? Am I getting through? Can you help me? Can you help me sharpen my message so that we're really communicating?
I think your messaging's doing very well today. Are there any especially strong examples of companies or leaders that you've worked with in recent years who have turned personal safety around from a not good start point?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the great examples, and this is old now, but I have worked with them a little bit on a case study, was Ford Motor Company under Alan Mulally about a decade or so ago. Why it's such a good example is that it's one of the more extreme cases of non-truth telling getting shifted to truth telling, right? Making it safe for people to tell the truth to power. That was just for a very long time literally not done. People not only believed, but it was true, that if you reported bad news up the hierarchy, that would be your last day on the job, right? People got fired for bad news, which is very difficult if you want to be a learning organization, right? There's no way to get better if you're firing people for telling the truth. So it was kind of an extraordinary example of turning it around, and it was done by modeling the right behavior, by creating the conditions where people realized that he was serious, and then by rewarding candor.
Okay, really great example. So your big speech is coming up very shortly. Without giving too much away, what can people expect? Why should they be sticking around, stopping their networking and going back into the main room to see you?
Well, I think ever since Google did a study about 6 years ago on what makes a team effective. Google is famous for having very strict hiring, very, very difficult to get a job there. And yet they found, and they were frustrated by the fact that they had persistent performance differences across teams. And so they said, okay, we're going to study it. They're very good with data, right? So they said, we're going to study it. And they did an extremely thoughtful, systematic job. I was not involved. But what they found was the #1 factor explaining performance differences across teams was psychological safety.
The number one
factor. There were other things like clarity and sense of purpose and meaning, but #1 differentiator was psychological safety. So they got very interested in that, and then they published this widely, and a lot of other people got interested. So the reason you should come to the talk is I'll talk about why might that be the case? Like, what's going on that something that sounds as squishy as psychological safety might be the #1 factor explaining performance differences across teams, even among very high achievers, right? And maybe even especially among high achievers. So we'll talk about what it is, what it isn't, which we've already done a little bit here.
Yeah.
And look a little bit at some of the research showing positive effects, not the Google study, but other studies. And then the real job is to say, okay, what are some of the very specific, very concrete things that each and every one of you can do more of to create more fearlessness?
Great. We love a speech with some practical guidance, and I know a lot of people are here for their own personal development. And just finally, how does it feel for you to be traveling again, being in a big event like this?
It is such joy. I really missed having an audience. I missed the laughter. I missed the human connection. There is just something about being in a room together that is energizing and a true privilege and pleasure.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have been saying that. So it's been great to have you here, Amy Edmondson. We look forward to seeing your speech on the main stage very shortly.
Great.
So thank you ever so much.
Thank you.
We're going to move on, and I'm going to tell you about our final guest for this section, who probably needs, she deserves a round of applause, does she not? And an even bigger one when she's back on the main stage. But our final guest for this section probably needs no introduction. It's Petter Stordalen, one of the best-known tycoons in the hotel industry here in the Nordics. Welcome. Also a property developer and investor, and is going to be on the main stage with us very shortly as well. But we're just going to pick up with a few questions about the travel industry during the pandemic. Obviously, travel integral to your business. We've been hearing so much about how it's affected people in all different walks of life and businesses. But what was going through your mind at the start of the pandemic and thinking, everything I've worked on is on pause right now?
First, you must remember that going into 2020, I had a bank meeting in the 24th of February. And I was there with my best suit on. I did present the best results ever. We had 205 hotels. We had both Wing, we had a cruise line company, Hurtigruten, we had airplanes, we had new ships. I was like, and we were like, I think I had at that time 7,000 room under construction, and I felt we were killing it. And then, so the meeting was a great success, and I was super happy. The bank was happy. And just the day after, I had this gut feeling. It was like, what's going on in Wuhan? It's something called like this bat virus, or the corona thing. But most people told me, relax, like it's not going to happen. We have seen it before. But I couldn't, I mean, it wouldn't stop. So I needed to get some information, and I did. And I will talk about it later today. And I just like, I saw into something which was something I've never seen into before. And I've been through everything from Black Monday, Asian crisis, oil crisis, property crisis, dot-com crisis, the financial meltdown, or close to the financial meltdown in 2008. But this thing, lockdown, wow.
Yeah, something different. And yeah, what was that? 28th of February, and I think it was 7th, 8th March, something that it was declared a global pandemic.
No, we were before even the Norwegian and the other Nordic governments. We did act so early that when we started to act, people thought we were panicking.
And what were you doing then? What were you doing in those early stages? Did you start laying people off and closing hotels straight away?
You make plans for the worst scenario you have ever seen. So we started to talk to the unions. I called my bank just 2 days after the meeting and told them, I see something I've never seen before. I need 100 million euro in extra credit, and I need it like as soon as possible. And they said, Peter, we needed the paperwork, but that's probably fine. I think I had the #1 ticket in the bank, like I'm #1 in the queue. So we knew that we act not on feelings, we act on facts. And the fact was, we had been talking to WHO, some people we knew, and they told us, what you see there will happen most likely in the Nordics.
So practically speaking, what went on within the company?
Now we started to plan to lay off like 8,000 people, to like reduce headquarters in Norway, Sweden with 50% in a matter of weeks. We had everything planned before the Norwegian government acted. So we were ready. But it was totally brutal. It's the worst thing I've ever gone through in my business life. I had the #1 hospitality company in the Nordics. My plan was to hire 45,000 people the next 5 years. Not to lay off 8,000 only in the hotel company. And then we had thousands of people in the other companies.
Yeah, really, really tough time for you. And we're going to talk about how you've built the business back. I want to talk about that transition phase. I traveled a little bit for business during the pandemic, and it was really weird. There was a point where you could sleep in a hotel, but you couldn't go to the bar, you couldn't go to the pool, you couldn't even sit in the lobby. And that was weird for me. That must have been so strange for you at the core of your business to not be able to visit some of the hotels as easily, to see them kind of in this sort of ghost world vibe.
You know what you see here? This is called goosebumps.
Yeah.
I tried to forget the lot to 2020 and 2021.
Sorry for bringing it back.
No. I will talk about it later today. It was brutal. You won't believe the shit. So, no, for me, it's more than unreal. It was like I was walking down the streets of the main street in Oslo. I was alone. It was Saturday. I was alone. I did walk into the biggest hotel in Norway. Normally, it's thousands of people there. It was like one receptionist. Normally, it works like 300 people there, and they were like 5 people. I felt like, is it a film?
Yeah.
Is it a horror movie?
Yeah.
Is it real? And you know what? We didn't know if this will last for like, it was lockdown. You couldn't travel from Oslo to Trondheim. It's like, you couldn't go to restaurants. You were not allowed. So you were luckily, if you were allowed to go. In Sweden, it's slightly different.
Yeah.
But
That's
Finland,
where I'm based. Yeah.
Finland was literally lockdown. Norway, Denmark, lockdown. So we had like, maybe we should have done. We didn't close all the hotels we actually should have closed because we wanted to have we didn't ever close camp. Even if we had 5 guests, we never closed camp. Camp didn't close during World War I or World War II, and we will not close it now. Did it cost us a lot of money? Yes. But we decided we were the number one before the crisis hit. We wanted to be the best one during the crisis, and then the best out of the crisis. And I lost tons of money.
Yeah, let's talk about those. So financial sacrifices, you had to pay off debts, you had to sell a few hotels in Denmark and in Sweden. And you're basically saying that felt terrible, but kind of, can you give us a bit more, on those moments when you were like, yeah, this I'm signing this away?
No, but you think about this. People said this will be over in months when we started to execute. I did sell off most of my listed shares, which is a kind of a control of liquidity, because I knew I need to get enough cash to take all the major companies, all the major holdings through this crisis. And it was kind of good that I didn't know, will it last for 3 months, 6 months, 12, 18, and it was nearly 2 years. It was actually 2 years after the Omicron. For me, it was just about, I need to have a plan for execution. I need to have the discipline to execute. I had the worst timing of selling all my listed shares. I had probably top 3 worst timing of selling a few hotel properties. But it's only bricks and walls. It's only like, I can solve like, this doesn't, I wanted to take the people, the culture through this pandemic, and I was willing to put everything on the table. So I was like have you been to Vegas?
No.
Okay, let's see, you have all the chips here, stable of chips, and you feel pretty good. You feel confident. And then you have one option. You need to take all those chips on either red or black. What do? Do you save?
Yeah.
Because you're afraid of losing everything? Or do you say, this is my fucking life? Those people, 17,000 people in the hotel company, they believe in me. They have believed in us for 25 years. And if they see that we are securing ourselves, what's all this talk about culture, people? These companies started as an investment in my life, and it became my life. And I took everything, all the chips on the table, and said, all companies, we will support all companies, whatever it takes. And it took a lot.
Yeah. And like you say, not every company did that. Some people did choose to protect some of their own assets in different ways. But we're coming through the other side of the pandemic, but there are new challenges ahead. What's happening in Ukraine, the global energy crisis. And so I know you're going to talk about some of this on the main stage as well, but what would be your message, your tips for businesses now who also love what they do, but are afraid of losing it due to the current challenges?
There will always be crises, small and big. And now, at least from my industry, we can run our business. We are not like, the government is not telling us you can't do your business, you can't run your hotels. So I know the energy prices cost us a lot, the inflation, I mean, everything is difficult right now, the war in Ukraine. But This will go over. You know what? If you're a business owner and you have not been through like 6, 7 major crises like I have, that's because of that I is soon to be 60. So you can think about it this. You need to think like it says in the Bible. The world can only go under once. It will not happen this time. It's just a matter of months. It might be a year or 18 months, but we will fix it. We will fix this. We will fix it with the energy prices. We will fix this with inflations. We will fix it. It might take some time.
Yeah.
But the Nordics, which is the best countries in the whole world, the Finns are the most happy people in the world according to all indexes.
Many studies, yeah.
Think about this. Right now, in the Nordics, that's probably the best place to be. So, it's the Finland, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, all these, they were built by optimists, not by pessimists. So stay optimistic and work hard with your business plan, and you need always to adapt. You always need to change. We have changed a lot. I will know because in the pandemic, we decided we will change the whole company. Going out, we will have a new universe called Strawberry Universe. I will want to be more relevant, more interesting, more important for you when you travel, go to restaurant, bars, than ever in the history. We started that in the middle of the crisis because it gave all the people working in the company some kind of, oh shit, we are going to invest, and we do. We will change the whole company. We will invest more in tech. We will change the company. Never miss the opportunities that you always find in crisis like we have been going through. And right now, I know we will fix this.
All right. Well, I can't wait to hear your speech on the main stage. We're going to be having more of a discussion as well and taking questions from the audience. So do have a good think about what you'd like to put to Petter after he's been on the main stage. That's taking place in about an hour's time. And we're going to be back here on the HS Visio stage at 7:05 with our next guests. We're going to be having some discussions about climate change. We're also going to be talking a bit more about building a strong business culture. So we'll be hearing from Jyske Kramer, who was on the main stage a little bit earlier, talking about culture, corporate anthropologist, and also one of our, we've had quite a few guests from Estonia, which is fantastic, and we've got our next guest from there, Merit Valsadu, CEO and founder of Single.Earth. She's going to be telling us about a new token system designed to help us to have a better carbon footprint. So really looking forward to those guests and to hearing from Petter on the main stage. But that's it for now from the HS Visio studio. Do keep in touch on the hashtag nbforum 2022 and tell us what you think. We'll see you again soon. Bye-bye. Good evening and a very warm welcome back to the HS Visio stage with me, Maddie Savage, journalist and broadcaster. Hello to all of you watching us on the live stream. Thanks for hanging in there. I hope you had a brilliant time watching all of the speakers. And hello to those of you who've chosen to sit down and hear our next fantastic set of interviewees rather than mingling. Kudos to you guys. You're going to continue your learning for the next 30 minutes or so. We're going to be talking about climate change, biodiversity and the blockchain with Merit Valsalo. She's CEO of the company Single.Earth. But first of all with me is corporate anthropologist and best-selling author Jitske Kramer. She was on stage earlier this afternoon talking a lot about how to build a strong corporate culture. So for anyone who missed that, I think we all know that culture is important in business these days. But what are the key secrets, do you think, to building the best kind of culture you can?
I think it's very important to understand how people shape those cultures. And what we see is that the main processes we need to take care of are interaction and decision making. Like if people don't meet, nothing will shape. You can have a group of people here and here, and what do we do and how do we shape those cultures? And when we look at strong corporate cultures, many times I meet people say, well, then we need to optimize all individuals, get their skill levels up, and it helps if everyone is better in communication. But if the mutual relationships between those people is not optimized, the group as a total is not as strong as it could be. It's like if one department is not talking to the other, then the total is not as strong as it could be. If the chief, the leader has no idea what's going on the shop floor, it's not as strong as it could be. So the focus is to gain good relationships and therefore to make sure that you have attention for diversity, because we know for sure that people have different opinions. So it's really taking care of interaction processes where people can actually meet on different levels, where it's safe for different views and we take them into account into the decision-making process.
All right, thank you. And just to clarify, we're still taking questions. I'd love to get some of those to our next couple of guests. It's slido.com and then putting in the code nbforum 2022, or for those of you here, you can use the Nordic Business Forum app. But I've got a question for you. I want to know how you got into this field. I actually studied anthropology in my first year at uni.
You did?
And most people went off and did corporate jobs, maybe journalism, government jobs. What led you to be doing what you're doing now?
It was actually by accident. I'm a theater anthropologist by studies. So, and theater anthropology is really the question, what is the role of theater in a society, and using theater to learn. So theater for development, basically. And that's very close to training and coaching. So somehow, long story short, I got involved in training courses and I entered corporate organizations. And I noticed that people do really funny stuff in office spaces. So it intrigued me that this corporate tribe has its own rituals, sometimes very hard to get into the building, even harder than to get into a country. So yeah, that's why I stayed around and looked at organizations.
And you brought the theatre stage presence with you today. Now, one thing that you've done along your travels around the world is meeting other kinds of leaders, not just business leaders, but spiritual leaders. And I'm quite interested to know what you've learned from them specifically, because I think in our day-to-day lives, there's a lot more talk about spirituality and well-being, but that's only really starting to creep into the business world to the same extent.
Yeah, I learned a lot. So every time I meet different people, for instance, I talked on stage when I went to Togo, and that's where I met Chabasi, among others. And one specific thing I learned from him, and that's very interesting, he said to me, because I always ask, what should I tell people when I go back home? What should I tell leaders? And he said, you got to tell them that leaders got to eat first. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with Simon Sinek's work, leaders got to eat last. And now the voodoo priest telling me leaders got to eat first. And we had a long conversation around that. And if I translate it into my own words, what he actually meant to say is that when things go smooth, eat first in a sense that be vital. Because when it comes to it and the crisis hits and it gets tough, you need to take decisions beyond what you do, and then you gotta eat last. But you can only do that if you're strong.
If you've got the fuel.
If you got fuel. And if I look at organizations, I see so many people and leaders who are so tired. And they plan too much work and back-to-back meetings, and they don't have the vitality to take that extra step. So it's really, sleep, eat, work out regularly. So when it comes to it, you're strong enough to hold the whole tribe, and not by cutting out jobs and people, but really take care of everything and take the extra step to go into innovations and transformations. So that's something I learned from Chabasi, and to him, it's obviously linked to the spirit world as well. Make sure that you connect with what's going on.
So how ready, though, do you think the business world is for these kind of messages? I mean, obviously the fact that you're here today is proof that people, are intrigued or are expected to be intrigued. But can you see more of a shift happening in the next 5 years where we're a bit more open?
Well, my view is tunneled and focused, of course. People ask me a lot, so at least there are some companies ready for it. And I think there's a whole bunch of people ready for it. If you see now the quiet quit in the States, it's a great resignation, and people are unhappy with what's going on. And it's pretty much linked to the questions around, do I belong to this organization? Do they take care of me? What happens in crisis?
We've been talking about that a bit on this stage during the day. So you believe that those, because they have become sort of quite buzzwords, but you believe that the sort of the thoughts and discussions behind them are genuine, that it is company culture that's causing a lot of people.
What I see is that I see too many people who feel that their voices are not listened to, and those people, they don't put their heart and souls into the work. And I see too many people who don't feel that the reciprocity system is okay. So I put something in, how much salary do I get? Do I have to take a second job to, So I think we need to take care of reciprocity systems. We need to take care of, do people really belong? Do we listen to them? Is the ranking fair? In other terms, do we feel that the decision making is in the right hands? And there I see a lot of frustration among young people, old people, and everything in the middle. So running an organization is way more than hitting your KPIs and getting your targets done. It's not running an organization, it's working with people. And I think at least people are ready for that.
Yeah, we've got a few questions coming in, which I guess also shows the engagement in this area. This one says, let's say a company has a great healthy culture with deep roots. What is the worst mistake that a new leader could do coming into that tribe?
There's many you can do. Well, first of all, with a strong culture with deep roots is in risk, because can they still operate? So culture change is also, how do we stay good and profitable and successful? So there needs to be a change all the time. But I think when you enter an organization, first find out, why do people do the things they do? And talk with people and ask. And if you run in and say, you can do everything different, then that's usually not a good idea. So tune in, see what's there, but also make sure that you listen to voices who says something else, and they kind of warn an organization which is very successful to stay successful, because you need to keep on growing all the time.
Thank you. Obviously, if all companies were doing well, you wouldn't have a job, but this person messaging in says, is there an example of a corporate tribe with a culture that you immediately resonated with? Is there any in your... It's the opposite, name and shame.
Every time I'm asked in a company or my colleagues of Human Dimensions, then there is trouble going on. And the thing is, I don't benchmark organizations. So what I do, I travel the world to learn from former headhunters, what we can learn from that in organizations. Or I travel to the Tanah Toraja in Sulawesi to understand their relationship with people dying. So I don't have examples of company cultures. I have examples across the globe of different tribes, what we can learn from that. So the answer to the question is, where I come, usually there is some kind of trouble.
Yeah.
And the traveling I do is mainly in different places in the world.
Okay. In your online bio, I was reading that you learn a lot also from conversations with random passers-by. I would say maybe in the Nordics, the fact we have an introvert's corner over there, maybe not the best for striking up conversations with strangers, although it seems to be going pretty well over in the after-work zone there. But what do you think is special and worthwhile about connecting with strangers?
If you truly connect, then every time you find a different story, and you can find that when you do your shopping. Even during Corona, when you can only go to your shops, you find different stories. It's truly about opening up and explore the world as a traveler. And I must say that the most intense lessons I got from taxi drivers all over the world. And one example is that I was in Bali a couple of years ago, and in my life lots of things happened. So I was tense, I was sad, I wasn't feeling well. I had to wait for another job I had to do in Singapore, so I went to Bali for a week, but not feeling good. And I entered the airport, a taxi driver came and said, "Where do you want to go?" I said, "To a hotel." Like, take me somewhere.
Wow, that unplanned.
Yeah, he said, "What's up?" And then I started crying, and he looked at me and he said, I'll take you to a place where your soul can find you again.
Wow.
And to me, that was so valuable. So he really looked for a hotel with a quiet spot. He said, "Don't go to Kuta Beach, go to Sanur, and we find you a spot, and we take you to a place where your soul can find you again." And those are the kinds of lessons. When you open yourself up to people, then you'll receive the lessons you need at that moment. It's like your teacher will find you.
Yeah.
So that's, to me, it's very, very important. Everyone has wisdom, and everyone can hand you the lessons you need in your life at that specific moment.
Yeah, well, thanks very much for sharing that story. Do you have any tips for people who are navigating networking for the first time in person in such a big event since the pandemic? I mean, not everyone's comfortable talking to strangers, and then if you haven't done it for a few years, people are a little
maybe
bit
then the advice is for the ones most comfortable, look out for people who are a bit shy or a bit more quiet. My main lesson besides that is walk around with an open view, ask questions, and be there, and be willing to be surprised. So networking, part of it is, what is it that you want to give and tell, and what is it that you want to receive? So if you approach someone with a question and ask them what is their day like or what they do, usually that opens up a whole journey into someone's life and work. And then you have a good moment on the spot without wanting to get something from that person. Just
being curious.
Yeah.
A few more questions coming in on Slido, which is great, also from our curious viewers and guests. This one here says, young people with education in the arts and humanities have a lot to offer the corporate world, but how can you do better at selling these skills to the corporate world?
Yeah, I recognize that question. When I finished my anthropology studies, the advice of the university was not to tell people I was an anthropologist. And that was like after 5 years of study. So, well, translated into the words people can hear. So, for example, I did a lot of work in factories in India and Germany, so factory world. And for the ones knowing that type of cultures, you gotta be an engineer for others to take you seriously. So I decided I had to be an engineer, but what type? So I said, I'm a behavioral engineer. And you know, that, like, whoa, what's that? I said, well, I try to look for the NCs, the non-conformatives, and that's the language they use. And I said, well, yeah. I said, do a root cause analysis. Really? I said, yeah, then I try to fix the interface without changing the people. And that's just what we need. So for everyone in the social science studies, you are valuable. That's for one. Don't let anyone tell you that you're not. Then you get into the whole field of qualitative research and quantitative. And qualitative research is the relationship between people. And we tend to be overwhelmed by, you know, make it measurable. If you can't measure it, it's not there. That's not true. I mean, if you can't measure love, is it not there? I don't think so. So first of all is believe in yourself. Try to put it in the language people are using. That's very anthropological to do so. And just know that in the end, it all boils down to people working and living together. If you can put it in like an Excel sheet or not. It's about people. And if I go to high-tech conferences, usually all the speakers, they say, in the end, it all comes down to people.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm afraid we do need to wrap it up there, but some really inspiring closing comments there. Let's give it up here for Jitse Kramer.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Our next guest is waiting in the wings, and we're going to be talking about climate change, biodiversity, and the blockchain with her. Her name is Merit Valsalu. She is CEO and founder of Single.Earth. She's visiting us from Estonia. I know a lot of Estonian followers in the crowd this evening as well, so hello to you. And thank you so much for joining us. Let's start with what you're doing. So you're creating a new token system which attaches monetary value to protecting nature rather than destroying it. Explain this a bit more for us in simple terms.
First of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here and to talk about these really important topics. But what we do at Single.Earth, well, in very simple terms, we are creating a new money. We're creating a new currency that is backed by nature, or more specifically, by the work that nature does. So nature creates all of these good things that we all use in our daily lives. In fact, it actually keeps this planet habitable for humans by providing us with the air we breathe, the food we eat, the water we drink, but also doing things like removing CO2 from the atmosphere and holding biodiversity. Now, these are all the good things that nature is doing, but these are also the things that nobody has ever paid for. So we decided that we need to assign value to these vital or critical ecosystem services, and we do that by creating a currency on top of that. Now, if you think of any cryptocurrencies in the world, they are minted based on some mathematical algorithms that are used to basically mint the tokens. We also use algorithms, but our algorithms are the ones that actually occur in nature. So we use these algorithms to mint tokens. So for example, for every 100 kilograms of CO2 captured in a biodiverse forest, we emit 1 token. And this is the basis of a new financial system that is here to actually help us to fight climate change and biodiversity loss.
What kind of support have you had for this so far?
So we've received support from very different parts. So first of all, when we came up with the idea, we understood that the only way how to protect nature is to make this financially feasible for landowners. So the impact has to come from us paying landowners for protecting nature. So the first thing that we needed was to validate, well, are landowners really interested in this? Are there forest owners, for example, willing to keep their forests growing if we pay for them for that? So we needed to validate that, so we started looking for landowners to test this idea with. And we, to our great surprise, actually understood that, well, landowners don't necessarily want to cut down their forest. They don't wake up in the morning thinking, well, I'm just going to go and cut down another forest. In fact, they actually are very much in favor of keeping their forest growing if they are able to get compensated for that. So right now we have landowners from Estonia, from Finland, from very many different European countries, but also from Brazil, for example. So we have a beautiful primary rainforest in the Amazon that we're able to protect through this type of an ecosystem. Then after that, once we had the landowners on board, we obviously needed to validate, like, is it scientifically actually solid? Like, can we actually claim that we're doing something good for the climate and biodiversity, and will this system actually work? So the next validation that we really needed was from the scientific community. So we tried to hire scientists into our team to make sure that whatever we produce is actually scientifically solid. And check again, scientists were actually extremely excited for this opportunity. So right now we have ecologists, climate scientists, data scientists working with us and proving that what we're doing is scientifically safe and sound. And thirdly, we've also received the first validation from buyers. So we have the first token holders in the world already. And we also have investors who have believed in this crazy vision. So we raised 2 rounds of financing to make this idea come to life. So I think the validation has come from all the necessary parts to make sure that it's actually doable.
Yeah, you've clearly got a lot of people on board from different sources, but On the flip side, there are going to be people cautious about investing money in any kind of cryptocurrencies, especially at a time when there are worries about economic crisis, the cost of living. What would you say to them?
Well, that's my personal opinion now. I believe that the cryptocurrencies are here to stay. There are a lot of cryptocurrencies that have been wiped off of the market, and rightfully so, because those that have been full of hot air deserve that. And it's sad, of course, that people have lost money on them. But then again, it has cleared the market for real tokens, real systems that actually bring more value to the world. And this is what we aim to be as well. And now, in terms of like this, us living in these very uncertain times with very high inflation, in fact, in Estonia, it's roughly 25%, which is insane, then we're already losing money by not doing anything. So I'm not here to give any financial advice, but if there's anything anybody wants to do with their money, it's probably wise to find ways how to invest them into the asset classes that will at least hold the value or perhaps increase in value. So I would think personally that nature is the one asset that is something that is already one of the most valuable assets on the planet, and it will increase in value in the future as we head towards more and more serious climate change and biodiversity loss. So we will learn to value nature more and more, so the value of nature will actually increase, hopefully, in the future.
For those still skeptical or worried about investing, what other innovative ways would you suggest for people to be climate smart? It's obviously a topic that you care a lot about.
Yeah, well, climate smart. Well, first of all, why we decided to attach our value proposal to like money or a currency is that we understood that it's very difficult for regular people to be climate smart. Like, unfortunately, although we have these marvelous opportunities to calculate the carbon footprint and do all this accounting, we can't do it. Like, we physically are not meant for making our calculations about our carbon footprint, our consumption on a daily basis. We're just not built like that. And that's one of the problems. So this is why we understood that if we're able to switch the underlying currency, then we can make it very easy for people to make this a part of their lifestyle. So we kind of make these decisions through economic choices rather than expecting them to make these calculations in their heads all the time. Now, if you don't want to switch your currency and you want to stay using your euros or dollars or whatever, there is like all the opportunities to make smart choices with your money. Like, starting from everyday choices. What are you eating? Like, we all know that eating meat is, eating beef is the worst thing you can do. Secondly, like, what are we wearing? Like there's so much pollution coming from just fast fashion. There's like we are all using plastics to wear on our skin, and we're causing so much microplastic pollution. So there are these very easy solutions that we can do with our money every day, but we are not making them because they're hard. They require us to make these decisions, and that is the thing that we're actually tackling. So how can we make sustainable choices a part of the economy rather than personal choice?
Yeah, rather than putting the onus on individuals. A couple of questions for you, Merit, from Slido users. This user asks, Merit, what would be a great education or career choice for a young, environmentally minded person?
A great education for...
Yeah, so what kind of course would you recommend? Do you think it's important for them to go to uni, or are there other ways, perhaps?
I think there's a lot of information available. So I never studied environmental studies myself, but there's actually scientists have been discussing, have been writing about this for decades. So I think there's a lot of opportunities to find information online. There's a lot of online courses happening on this topic. There's a lot of reports being published every single year to keep track on how we're doing, and they're getting worse and worse and worse. So I think the information is there. If you start going deeper into this, you dive deeper into that, so you find one reference and another one. You can go into this endless hole where you just discover more and more information. But I think it's more about what you do then. Most of the people just take in this information and still do nothing. So I think that is something that I would encourage people to do more, to make personal choices, to talk about this more. And I think there's the power is actually in personal awareness.
Well, how optimistic are you that there really can be a big shift? Because like you say, people have been writing, talking about this. I was at school 20 years ago, we were doing projects on the environment, and it's only really in the last couple of years that there seems to be this burning push for action that's not necessarily being translated into that action.
That is true, especially if we look at like I think we've all kind of put our trust in the governments that they will somehow fix this. And I think this is where we got it wrong. Like we know that we need to, for example, cut our emissions by 45% by 2030. So that's in like less than 8 years. Like if we look at the governmental commitments, we are on the track to increase our greenhouse gas emissions by 14%. So we put all this trust in the governments that they will fix this. Now we know that they're not going to fix this, but we still hope that maybe they will figure it out. But it's not just climate change. There are actually other very serious things happening as well. So for example, biodiversity loss. And with that as well, like in 2010, the United Nations had similar global biodiversity goals. And 10 years later, the same governments came together and realized that they had not met a single one of these goals. So I think I still have hope that we're able to tackle these challenges, but I think we must understand that it's people who must take responsibility for this. But because if you think of how change happens, it usually happens through masses. So if consumers change their habits, then what happens next? The companies follow because they want to be where their consumers are. And once the companies and businesses are on board, well, then governments come on board as well. So it actually, we've been expecting this to be a top-down movement, but it's not going to be like that. And I think we now have the facts that this will not happen like that. So the only way for us to change this is by making like this consumer and individual movements.
Yeah. There are some companies doing better than others, though, and we've got a question coming in now saying, are there examples of some companies you believe are actually making a change today? I think Patagonia is a big example this week.
Yeah.
What do you make of that?
I think that's brilliant. I think that is like the best thing that I could ever dream of. Like that is something.
And for anyone who hasn't heard that news, they're basically sort of giving away the company, aren't they?
They're giving away the company and all the profits to fix climate change. And I think that's an amazing example. On the other side, like some of the worst examples we see is actually companies trying to tell that there are easy fixes to climate change. And I think that is one of the most worst thing that you can do as a company, or like kind of giving individuals the idea that there are easy fixes to climate change. There are not. Like we can't carbon offset our way out of climate change. We can't do these easy solutions, but by telling or indicating to consumers that we can do that, we kind of take away the only activism that those people had. Like there are people who are willing to do something, but if we tell them, well, just buy carbon offset and you're good, then they do it and they think that it's done, but it's actually not done. So we're just wasting this energy that people actually have and just not doing any real impact.
Very brief answer to this next question, but it is an important one. Business travel is a huge polluter, but being here at Nordic Business Forum, I think a lot of people do find value in events like these. How should companies and people be making decisions about business travel?
A good question. Everybody loves to connect. I think we should travel less. We should be more smarter and more selective about the destinations where we go to. Travel a lot less in the sense that we take, instead of like going on 5 trips per year or 10 trips per year, maybe take 1 or 2. And of course, every time, think about the choice that we were making. Like we were offered to fly over from Tallinn to here, which is like 80 kilometers away. Like we just took the ferry because it's a better way. So I think these very small choices can already make a big contribution.
Okay.
Yeah, start from that.
Yeah, thank you so much. Some really interesting reflections. All right, so thank you so much to Merit Valsadu. And that's almost it. That's almost all we've got time for from the HS Visio stage here at Nordic Business Forum. I'm Maddie Savage. It has been brilliant hearing from today's guests and speakers and having such an engaged audience as well, both here in the room and online. I will be back tomorrow We're going to be starting with some deep dive interviews. We're going to be talking about brand strategy. We'll be getting into geopolitics, and we'll be talking about how companies can get more creative in the years to come. So please do join us then. In the meantime, have a brilliant evening. Bye-bye from us.